welcome you to our webcast, which is about setting KPI targets. We are going to explore 6 tips to set targets that motivate people to improve performance. Now, some of you may know me, some of you may not know me yet, but I am Stacey Barr. I am a performance measure specialist and I am the creator of Pump. It's really nice to have you with us on this webcast today. Now, maybe like you, I've bumped up against dramas of setting KPI targets over my entire career. They're a lot like a knife. They can be a tool that can be used really well to create really beautiful things, or they can be used badly and end up creating a lot of damage. But despite that, I really do like targets. The trick, I think, is in how we frame them, how we set them, and the meaning that we give to them as we pursue them. Now, needless to say, I have a very specific way of setting and monitoring and reaching targets. And so target setting is embedded into Pump. Now, Pump is the performance measurement methodology that I created, and that was 25 years ago. It has evolved since then, of course, but now it is used all around the world. And my co-host today, Peter Ndar, is one of my small global team of licensed Pump partners who leads Pump across Africa. So thanks for being here, Peter.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to have you with us on this webcast. I am a strategy execution specialist, and in my work, I integrate Pump with strategy execution approaches, including strategic management systems based on the Balanced Scorecard to help clients seamlessly integrate their strategies, implement their strategies, sorry. I'm the founder of BC, a management consulting firm based in Nairobi, Kenya, that offers training and consulting services on strategic performance management, KPIs, and polarity management. I am the Pump partner for Africa, Stacey said, and before I encountered Pump, I had mixed reactions to targets, mainly because they were linked to my rewards, especially when I was employed. I bet this may be the same with you, but Pump changed all that for me.
Which is tremendous. Everyone, today you'll get just a few of the Pump tips for setting and using targets. I chose this topic for the webcast because target setting continues to be one of the most anxious parts of measuring performance for many people. Targets can be imposed upon us. It can be really hard to pull them out of thin air, and too often we don't even reach them. So the cynicism and fear around targets continues, and consequently, it can reduce to a trivial exercise of picking numbers that everyone knows they can achieve. But what is the point of setting targets that we already know we can achieve? That's not what performance improvement's about. But at the same time, what's the point of setting targets that are so lofty and so challenging that we don't believe we'll ever have a chance of achieving them? So the question is it even possible to set targets that are motivating, that are achievable, and performance improving? So we're going to find out as we explore what I hope you will agree is a fresh approach to target setting, one that directly addresses your biggest challenges with targets. It should be enough to start improving your target setting process so that it's better able to set sensible targets that really do inspire continuous performance improvement. We'll be a little bit interactive through this webcast too, so I hope you feel energized to participate a little bit, share your questions and experiences with targets at any time, and that will be using the questions box. We'll probably ask you for a few inputs in that questions box, so see if you can locate where it is. But anyway, over the next hour or so, we're going to explore how most organizations do set and use targets and also the success that they have with them, or lack of success. We will go through a bunch of practical ideas for you to rebuild your target setting process, and we'll answer any questions you have about KPI targets as well. But we will also give you an idea of how target setting works in the Pump performance measurement process. We'll get started now with a quick snapshot of how much target setting actually happens in your organization. You may not know the true answer to this question. Please just make your best guesstimate. But let's get a sense of the degree to which targets are used in your organization. So here are some options for you to choose from. Are you in an organization where every measure has at least one target? Or maybe many measures have a target, but not all of them? Maybe some do, some don't. Maybe only a few measures have a target, or are you in an organization where no measures have a target at all? So choose the best response there that suits your organization. I'll give you a few more seconds to participate. I think we have just under half of you have so far, so I'll give you a bit more time. All you have to do is just click on the option that sounds like it best matches your organization. And Peter, I'm just looking at the results as they're coming in, and it's kind of surprising. All right, we just got over 2/3 of you have voted. I'll give you a tiny bit more time, and then I'll close the poll. There we go. Okay, 3/4 of you have voted. Let's close this and I'll share the results with you. So, Peter, it looks like half of the people in our audience have many or all of their measures with a target, which is a little high compared to, as you know, Peter, I've run this webcast with our other pump partners around the world as well, and that's the highest that I've seen.
Really?
Yeah, that's
interesting.
Yeah, does it surprise you? I mean, the clients that you work with, do you find that most of them have targets for the majority of their measures?
Yes, I think most of them do work with targets at least. So this is not surprising at all.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Well, it's different around the world for that matter. So clearly target setting is a big part of our audience's organizations, which is really interesting. Thanks everyone for sharing that and participating. Targets are certainly useful, and for them to take a more formal role all throughout our organizations, what we need is the right context. So for those of you who are not in that 50% where target setting is clearly a common practice, one of the reasons that might be stopping target setting from being more formal is that the context might not quite be right. So Pete.
Yeah, a great
Tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, a great context is that targets give a destination to our journey of improving performance. We start any journey of performance improvement from where we are now. We call that a performance baseline. Every measure has one. In PUMP, we use XMR charts, and that makes it so easy to work out our really baseline. Imagine this measure is workplace accidents on a monthly frequency. The baseline is at about 175 per month, which is that blue line you see there. What do you think a good target could be for this measure? Noticing the baseline and also the amount of variation in the measure value. Type into the questions box what do you think a good target could be.
Okay, so I hope all of you have found the questions box in your webinar control panel. So yeah, just have a look at that. Look at where the baseline is. As Pete said, it's about 175 on average workplace accidents per month. So what would you set as a target for this measure? So, so just type a number into. Okay, great, Sean. Thank you. We've got your response there. I'll wait a few moments for others of you that have an idea to type that in. Thanks, Sandra. Peter, do you know how to pronounce the next name.
Okay, I gotta, do I have it visible with me?
PJ.
Let me see.
Call me PJ.
Yes,
I'm so sorry, PJ. That's the problem with me being Australian. It's just an
okay,
unfamiliar. I'd love to
no
know how to
worries.
say it properly. But PJ, thank you for your response. All right, so we've had a few responses for this target, what the target could be, Peter. So we've Sean has said 0, Sandra said 300, PJ said 200, and gave us a cute little emoji. Thank you, thank you. Now, Jerry's saying that the questions box is not visible at her end, so some of you may not be able to see it, unfortunately. I'm not quite sure how to rectify that. But that's a variety of targets there. The 200, remember this measure, everybody, is workplace accidents, the number of accidents happening in the workplace. So would we really want to have it be higher than 175 on average? So a lot of you are suggesting numbers higher. Pete, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, would you?
No, not really, not really. In many organizations, targets are set before the measures are even clearly defined. In this situation, at least we have the measure defined, so we can be able to know how to test the target. In PAP, we set targets only after we have enough performance measure values to calculate a baseline, as shown in that XMR chart. That's why we don't set targets until step 6 of PAMP, for those who are familiar with PAMP, when we put our measures into these XMR charts. So our first target setting tip is this. What matters more than the target itself is that we have made a commitment to improve something that matters. To move it from its current baseline performance to a new desired level of performance. Targets are symbol of that commitment to improvement. So in this case, definitely our target should be above that 175, that baseline performance of 175 that we're seeing there if we want to improve performance.
So yeah, we want the target to be below that. We want fewer accidents. A few of you have
Fewer
actually said,
sorry.
yeah.
Yes, fewer accidents. Sorry.
That's all right. And this is the tricky thing is we're just not used to pulling a good target out of thin air. We've really got to think about what we want, and that's what that baseline helps us do. We don't want an average of 175 workplace accidents per month. We want much fewer than that. Some of you have said 0. That's a very challenging target. But Leonard, you said 140, and maybe that's a realistic target to set in the short term to reduce the workplace accidents. So yeah, cool. Now, if the current context of target setting in your organization is vague or completely undefined, or it's associated too much with success and failure, like if you set a target for 0 for workplace accidents, we're not going to suddenly have 0 next month. So we're kind of setting ourselves up with that success or failure thing, which isn't constructive. Instead, start conversations now with your colleagues about targets being the destination for the journey of performance improvement, and make sure that you don't set targets too early in the process. Like Peter said, it's, you don't want to pick a target before you really understand the measure. Otherwise, it's just like, if you're setting a travel destination before you've worked out how much time and money you have available to take the journey. Now, when you have a constructive context for target setting, like the journey of performance improvement, you can then make more sense of what can feel like a hit and miss game with target setting. So the pointy end of target setting is reaching the targets. And this is where a lot of the human dysfunction around targets kicks in. And that's because people are never really sure if they can reach them or not. So again, you may not know the true answer to this question. So just make your best guesstimate. How often in your organization do targets get reached? So how often does your organization reach its KPI targets? And this is just a standard spectrum from almost always all the way down through to almost never. So just pick the response that suits you best. Oh, Jerry found the questions box. That's cool. Thank you. I'm glad it's there for you. Great. We've got about 2/3 of you have voted. I'll give you a little bit more time for the rest of you to choose which option best describes your organization and how often it reaches its targets. Okay. Oh, wow. That's 85% of you have voted. That's pretty, 95%. Good grief. That's one of the highest participation rates I've seen, Peter, in a poll on a webcast. That's incredible.
Right.
All right. I'm going to
Yeah.
close it now. I'm not going to hope for more than 95% of you, and I'll share the results. So, Peter, we're seeing the vast majority of people will occasionally in their organisation be reaching targets. Only 17% often reach them. Nobody is always, or no organisation's always reaching them. And there are a few that almost never reach them. Again, does that surprise you from your experience with your clients about how often targets are reached?
Not at all, Stacey. This is quite, I think this is the trend. You find a lot of organizations occasionally, reach their targets really.
Yeah, it's everyone for the other webcasts I've run, and Peter with our other partners, we did actually get quite a few saying that they almost always reach their targets. And in both situations, both partners, and Peter, this was Louise and Paul, they both said if you're always reaching your targets, there's a very good chance you're not setting them challenging enough. You're setting easy targets so that you can hit them. So it's good to see that that we may not have that problem here. Thanks again, everyone, for participating in that. Now, the problem is that we give a fail versus succeed meaning to hitting targets. That's what can make a lot of people really uncomfortable. Peter, over to you.
Yeah, if we set targets with expectations of hitting them, then it's easy to feel like we have failed if we don't hit them. Expectation make it a judgment process, and that causes us to focus on hitting numbers. We all know what happens when people are held accountable to hit targets beyond their current capability. They take shortcuts, they ignore unintended consequences, they make excuses, they act defensively, and also they fudge the numbers. Intentions, however, give us the space to explore possibilities. Framing targets as intentions rather than expectations help us remember the why of the target, why I'm setting target. As long as we remember the why, which is all about improving performance, we won't focus too much on the how much. We can set intentions for 3 things with every measures target. Firstly, for the direction of change we want. Secondly, for the ballpark size of change we want. And thirdly, for what we will learn in reaching for that target. In PAMP, our motto is to reach for target, not to hit them. We want targets to give us something tangible to reach for, so that we reach further than we could otherwise we would otherwise might have.
This is a tricky one to fix in organisations where hitting targets is the definition of successful performance management. Just out of curiosity, there's a little hand tool on your webcast control panel. Is in your organisation, is hitting targets the definition of successful performance management? Just raise your hand if you suspect that it is, that it's, there is that idea of we must hit our targets. Okay, yeah, a few hands are going up there. Quite a few hands are going up. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing that. Oh, a lot of hands going up. Yeah. One way to get around this, at least until the culture fundamentally changes around performance, is to use what in Pump we call staged targets. Now, this means that if you have a target that you're not confident in how to hit, you're not sure if you'll hit that target, then instead what you can do, I mean, you might have to keep that target and maybe it's for a year down the track or something that you've got to hit it by. Then in the interim, set 1 or 2 easier targets. So you might set an easy target for the next 3 months and then another slightly less easy, but still it feels achievable target for say 6 or 9 months into the future. And we use these interim targets as practice to learn more about how we can influence performance, and then that helps us figure out what we can do differently to maybe even hit that ultimate target. Now, setting realistic targets is another piece to the puzzle of being able to reach them. And how realistic your targets can be depends on when you set them. Now, as I already mentioned, or Peter mentioned this actually, what we do is we set targets at step 6 in Pump. Now, Pump has 8 steps, so some of you might be wondering, why do you set them so late? Well, we'll get to that. But for now, when do you set targets in your organization? Let me launch the poll. So there are a few options here. Again, just pick the best one that suits. So do you set targets in your organization when your goals are set, but you may not necessarily have the measures chosen yet? Or do you set your targets as soon as you've chosen the measures, but you may not have any data or baselines for those measures? Do you wait until your measure has a baseline, like we saw in that workplace accidents example before? Or do you have a varied approach? Could it be any one of those first 3 things? Or are you in an organization where target setting happens completely at random? So you might have to think about this one a little bit more. I'll give you a bit more time to respond. This one is taking a little bit longer. That's only half of you have voted. Okay, that's 2/3. Oh, wow, that was quick. We got up to 80 very, very quickly, almost 90%. All right, a few more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Closing now. And everyone, this is what your feedback looks like. So Peter, very rarely do we have organizations here where target setting happens at random, but it seems like most have a combination of the first 3 approaches. That's probably not too surprising because very often target setting's not so formalized, hey, that there's only one way to do it.
Yeah, that's true. This reflects, I think, what I've experienced before.
Yeah. Although everyone, I would say that if you're setting targets at the same time your goals are set, but you don't have measures yet, I think you've got a big risk of ending up with targets that don't make sense, and we'll come to that as well soon. But thanks everyone for sharing your feedback about when targets are set in your organization. Now, the reason why it matters when we set the target is that before it's possible to set a target that is realistic and sensible, there's a minimum amount of information that we need first. Hey, Peter.
Here are the basic steps in performance measurement. Firstly, we set out our goals. Then we select measures for those goals. Next, we get the data and start reporting our measures. And then we can interpret the measure and decide how to improve performance. At which step do you think we should be setting targets? If we have to consider what Stacey has told us in terms of we need minimum amount of information. So I would like you to type into the questions box which step you think is best for setting a realistic target.
And Peter, I probably should have put numbers on those boxes, but everyone, it's just easy for you to, out of the 4 boxes we have there on the screen, just call them 1, 2, 3, or 4 and tell us which, at which of those 4 steps do you think we should be setting targets. Sean says step 6 because we've already said step 6 in pump. Thank you, Sean. Okay. PJ, you've put your thought in there. We'll just wait for a few others to. Sean's corrected his and said step 4. Very funny. Okay. Anyone else going to? Thanks, Anthony. Jerry, Avivit, Rosie, Leonard. Cool. Okay. We're getting lots of replies there. So Peter, in response to your question, a lot of people are saying 4, step 4. One is saying step 2 and another one is saying step 3. But when is the best time?
Right, the best time to set a target that can motivate and drive performance improvement is actually here. Step, as you can see there, we start
kind of between steps 3 and 4.
Therefore, we start thinking about it at the point of reporting our measures. That's because this is when we see our measures in a graph and can see its current baseline. Remember, XMR charts do this best, which is why we use them in Pump. We can fine tune that target when we start to evaluate what it will take to get performance to change. If the change is harder than we expected, we might need less challenging. We might need a less challenging target, or maybe just more time to reach for it.
Exactly. So at the very least, we need a clear goal with a meaningful measure and a baseline for that measure before we can set a meaningful target. Now, sometimes we also need to understand how hard the change will be to reach the target before we can decide how big the target should be, or like Peter was saying, how long or how much time we might need to put the effort in to reach that target. So if your organization insists that targets are set right at the start, that's sort of step 1 there on the 4-step flow chart we have, then all is not lost. You can still treat each step as a revision of the target size or the time frame for the target, or use that opportunity to set interim targets like we discussed before, but it's not going to be a meaningful target until you're at least past step 3 on that chart. And that does correlate, Sean, with step 6 in Pump. We just kind of summarized it into 4 steps just there. Now, even if you do apply all these tips for setting targets, one common behavior in organizations can still sabotage everyone's motivation for them. Now, if you're familiar with my work at all on performance measurement, or you have any familiarity with Pump, you'll be familiar with one of our mottos, and it is this: performance measures are a tool in the hand, not a rod for the back. So performance measures will always feel like a rod for our backs, while ever they're tied to our personal reward or our reputation, and that can be financial or non-financial. But how does this happen in your organization? So I'd like to ask you, in what ways are targets tied to people in your organization? So are people remunerated, like financially, based on hitting targets? Or are they just formally performance managed if they don't hit their targets? Are they loosely held accountable for targets? Or is it a combination of those first 3 things? Or are you in an organization where people are not judged in any way by targets? So again, I'll give you a little bit of time to ponder and just pick your best guesstimate of what happens in your organization. with how targets are tied to people. We're not quite at 50% of you voted, so I think you need a little bit more time. This is a contentious one, and I know that the way that targets are tied to people's performance, it does vary around the world in different cultures. In the public sector, for example, Peter, we don't see that happen so often here in Australia or even in the Americas. I'm not sure if it's like that in the public sector in government organisations in Africa, though.
Yeah, it's similar. Though they have targets, but it's not normally attached to their remuneration.
Yeah.
But in fact, lots of public sector, but they have what they call performance contracting, which basically are targets for individuals and the organizations. Yeah, but it's not tied to remuneration.
Yeah. Okay. Is that the case? Hang on. I'll close the poll and share the results. But if you're in a public sector organisation, maybe just click the raise your hand tool, and that might help us get a bit of an understanding of why the first option here is so low. So yeah, a few of you. Oh, not as many hands going up as I thought of people in public sector. But it's good to see that, Pete, that there's only a few people in our audience that are in organisations where people are remunerated based on targets.
Yeah.
But quite a few are formally performance managed or held accountable. That's over half, and nearly a third of you are saying that it's a combination of those three things. But again, Peter, out of all the times we've run this webcast around the world, this is the highest percentage we've gotten for people not at all being judged by targets. 24% is really high, and I think that's great. I think the bigger we can make that bottom percentage, the better.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you again, everybody. Oh, did I share? I didn't show you. Did I show you share the results with you? There you go. Sorry, I thought I clicked the share button, but maybe I didn't. Can you see it now, Peter?
Yes, can see it here.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Now, if we really want to have targets that drive real improvement, then we have to aim them at something other than people. We all know this, that targets can motivate teams to make big step improvements, or they can manipulate people into behaviours that can sabotage other important results. Now, in the UK, now this is a story my physiotherapist told me, okay, so I haven't fact checked it. I don't know if it's actually true, but he worked with the English Premier League. So given that he was a physiotherapist for the actual players, I kind of trust his word. But he was telling me that soccer players were paid something like £60,000 for scoring a goal in a game over and above their usual fee. Now, if you've ever watched a soccer game, you'll notice, Peter, is it soccer in Africa or is it football?
It's football, but it's soccer. We call it football here, but it's soccer basically. Yes, it's soccer.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. So if you've ever watched a soccer game, then everyone, you'll notice that the players do seem to fall over a lot, and they often look like they're in excruciating pain. And often they can get a penalty kick as a reward for being injured. And when they land that goal, they'll get their £60,000. But seconds later, the fallen player is up and they're playing like they were instantly healed by a miracle. When we watch the slow motion replay, we'd swear that it was air that tripped them over. So it makes us wonder, is the love of the beautiful game eclipsed by their love of monetary rewards for scoring goals? Now, subtle forms of cheating like this, I guess, are very commonly associated with the use of targets to reward or punish individual people. And it's not because those people are bad. The soccer players aren't bad either. It's just because they're behaving in a way that serves themselves or defends or preserves themselves, if you like. They're not as interested in their team or their customers or their organization when the targets are threatening them and they have to defend themselves against what would happen if the target's unachieved. Because fundamentally, it's very rare that ever one person is in complete control of an organizational target being reached. So that's why in Pump, we only ever measure process performance. We never measure people. We never set targets that individual people are accountable to hit. We want measures and their targets to be aimed at processes so people can use them as tools and align their behaviors to the team's goals and the organization's goals.
Remember, the performance of an organization is not the sum of the performance of its people. Organizational performance only improves when we all aim at targets that we aim at our organizational performance only improves when we all aim at a target that improve our processes. This doesn't change overnight, since employee management and executive remunerations are ingrained in our performance management systems. But a change can be triggered by talking about a new definition of accountability, one that moves away from hitting targets. For example, accountability can be about how people use measures to make informed decisions to improve performance. That's what we mean when we say a measure is a tool in the hand, not a rod for the back.
Indeed.
So all this talk, yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, so all this talk that we have had so far is about targets, and we are yet to define what a good target looks like.
So let's start talking about what targets look like. And we need to, because targets can be formulated in different ways, and how we formulate the target can influence how we respond to it. So there are a bunch of different common ways that targets can be formulated. In your organization, it may be mostly one of these, or it could be several of them. So pick as many as you've seen of how targets are written in your organization. For example, if you might have targets of 100% or zero, and that basically means you're aiming to make the measure hit a perfect result, like 100% on-time performance or 0 injuries. Or maybe you have targets that you have to hit every week or every month. So if the measure doesn't hit the target in the given week or month, then you've got to explain why. Maybe you have targets that are expressed as thresholds, and that kind of means that you've got a range within which you want the measure values to always be, and they might be color-coded ranges, who knows, but you need to keep the measure inside the thresholds. Or you might have targets for central lines or process limits. And of course, this is the Pump way of setting targets with XMR charts. So if you're not familiar with them, you're probably not going to pick that option, but we'll explain that a bit more later. Or are you finding that almost all your targets are written as a percentage improvement? Like you might be measuring something like the number of customer complaints, but then you set a target for 10% improvement. Or you might be measuring an average, but your target is always expressed as a percentage. All right, enough talk. I'll give you a few more seconds to respond and pick as many of those as you've seen used in your organization. And if you've got a different one that's not on that list, feel very welcome to type in the questions box and tell us a bit about it. But these are the most common ones. Peter, can you think of any? I think they're the most common ones I've seen. Have you seen different ways of writing targets?
No, mostly these are the ones that people use.
Cool. All right, a few more seconds, everybody, then I'll close the poll. Okay, that's nearly 80% of you again, so it's pretty good. Here we go. Now I'll remember to share the results with you. This is quite an interesting spread across there. I think probably the biggest thing to notice is that very few are setting targets the XMR chart way, and I guess that's because, Peter, not a lot of people in our audience are using XMR charts yet.
Yeah, that's correct.
but all the other methods are quite common. It seems like nearly 3/4 of you are in a situation where you have to hit a target each week or each month and explain what's going on. And that's one of the challenges with not using XMR charts, is that with that method, we're ignoring natural variability. Measure values can change a little bit each month naturally without there actually being a cause for the change other than just random variation. So if we have to react to that random variation, we're kept very busy, and it can feel like we're on this roller coaster of constantly having to explain the ups and downs. And really, oftentimes there's nothing going on at all that needs explaining. Now in Pump, we like one particular recipe for formulating targets. So Peter, I'll build this slide as you talk through it, if you like.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. An organization had a measure called excess recreational leave, which is calculated as the number of staff with an excess recreational leave balance. In that organization's business plan for 2022 to 2024, this measure has a target of 90% of staff with no excess leave accrued to be achieved by June 2024. And here is the measure in an XMR chart. Do you notice any problem with this combination of measure and target? Type into the questions box. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Peter. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Stacey.
I was just going to say the same thing. I thought I'd lost you. You might have lost your mic for a minute, but I'll be patient. You were pausing for effect.
Right. Yeah, just say type into the questions box what problem you see if you think it's all fine. That is, all this measured target is fine.
Or in the questions box, if you see any kind of problem with the combination of this measure and that target, also tell us what that problem might be. So Sean said there's no upper and lower control limit, and I guess, Sean, you mean on the target. Everyone else is either pondering. Yeah, you do mean that. Thanks, Sean. And so far, Sean, you're the only one who shared a comment on this, so maybe the others are waiting, Peter, for us to reveal the problem.
Yes, it looks like.
Yeah. So yeah, continue. Go ahead, Pete.
Right. So the two main problems with these target formulations are: one, the target is different, is in different units to the measure. The measure is a count or number, and the target is a percentage. Second, the target is the opposite of the measure. The measure is counting people with excess leave, but the target is for people without excess leave. We can't put these targets on the same graph as the measure because of these two problems. We need to be careful that our targets fully match our measures. Assuming we decided that the measure should stay a count, the target will then have to change to a count. And this different target can then match the measure and be placed on the XMR chart with the measure. If you are familiar with XMR charts, you will know this target is set for where we want to move the central line. That is the blue horizontal line, the baseline you saw earlier, or the one you see here, the blue baseline, the blue line.
Absolutely. And Anthony, I just want to acknowledge you said that the measure does not correlate to the goal, and that's kind of looking backwards at what the goal is. It's true that we have to choose a measure that matches our goal, but whoever the team was that chose this measure for that goal, it must have meant something to them. But whatever the measure is that we've chosen, we've got to make sure that we set the target for that specifically. Now, everyone, if you want more information on XMR charts, and raise your hand if you do, are you intrigued by them? Do you want to learn more about them? Just do that little raise your hand tool. Okay, great. Quite a few of you. Yes, all right, good. So what you can do is go to my blog, which is measureupblog.com. And in the search box, put XMR target, and you'll find a whole lot of stuff about how XMR charts work, but also how we set targets for measures using XMR charts. And you know what Peter's just walked you through here on the slide is an example of that. Now the point here is that targets have to match the movement of your measures. To match the movement of a measure, that means the target has to be in the same units as the measure. So if the measure's a count, the target's a count. If the measure's an average, the target's an average. If the measure is a percentage, the target is a percentage. And basically that means that the target has to be a number that the measure value could take, and therefore we can put it on the chart. Now this is quite a technical part of setting KPI targets, but we're going to wrap up by returning to the softer side of target setting. Now, how people feel about targets is at least as important as how you formulate them. No matter how good the target is, if people just don't feel right about it, it has a snowflake's chance in hell of motivating anyone to reach for it. So in your organization, how do you think people feel about targets? Are they fearful, meaning that they actively avoid them at all costs? Are they anxious? So they still don't like them, but they'll go ahead and set them. Or are they uncaring? They just don't, whatever, just let me get the target setting over and done with and I'll get back to my real work. Or are they confident and feel that they've got some level of control or influence over their targets and how to reach them? Or are you in an organization where people are just excited by targets? They're highly motivated and they just love the thrill of stretching toward a challenging improvement. Which best describes your organization? I'll give you a little bit longer to reply. Bit slower on this one, everyone. Maybe it's that you're not too sure, and if you're not too sure or one of the answers there just doesn't kind of match your organization, feel free to just type in the questions box and let us know. But I'll give you another 5 seconds or so and then I'll close the poll. Okay, closing. We've got 2/3 of you, that's not too bad. All right, so here come the results. And Peter, at some kind of not a happy space for targets in a lot of these organizations. No one's confident, no one's excited.
Yes, not surprising at all because of the way targets are used in organizations. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. So it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. Obviously, mostly people do not feel that great about targets at all. But if we want people to move away from the fear about targets and move toward excitement for them, what we need is 3 conditions that have to be met first.
And these are the 3 conditions that need to be met for people to start feeling positive towards targets. The first one is support. The team's leaders need to give visible, active, and regular support to the team in reaching for their KPI target. The more proactive leaders are in giving inspiration, encouragement, permission or authority, money, access to help, space and time, or even just thanks, the more supported the team will feel. The second one is buy-in. This means that the team feels ownership of their performance measure and its target. The more a team has direct involvement in and influence over the design of the measure and the selection of the target, the more buy-in they'll have. The third one is belief. How much does the team perceive they have the ability to reach their KPI targets? The more a team has skill in the task of performance improvement, knowledge of the causes that constrain current performance, and influence over the business process or system that needs improving, the stronger their belief can be in the target.
So one exercise you might like to take, everyone, is to ask teams in your organization how much leadership support they feel they have, how much involvement they had in selecting the targets, and how much influence they believe they have over changing performance. Now, you might not get all three of these conditions at once, but ultimately it really is going to be very hard to reach any target that lacks these three human conditions. So there you have it. Did you get all the tips for setting better KPI targets? And just in case you didn't, let me go over them all. There were 6 of them. The context of targets is to give a destination to the journey of performance improvement. The energy of targets is as intentions, not expectations, and that means we reach for them, we don't hit them. The prerequisites for targets are a clear goal, a meaningful measure, and a baseline. The focus is to aim at targets that are aimed at processes, not targets aimed at people. The formulation of a target must match the movement of your measure, and the human conditions for targets to thrive are support, buy-in, and belief. Now, targets most definitely can be motivating. They can be achievable and they can be performance improving. And it has much more to do with how we approach target setting than it does with the actual targets that we set. Now, PUMP helps us set more meaningful targets because it puts the right steps into the right order to embed them into performance measurement.
PUMP is a proper performance measurement process with 8 deliberate steps. Let me walk you through them and point out how target setting is embedded in this process. Step 1, make sure the entire measurement team understands enough about what good measurement practice is to participate in the process. Here we frame targets as part of continuous improvement. Step 2, make sure that the goals or results we want to achieve are written clearly and measurably. Every target needs a why, and a clear goal makes the why clear too. Step 3 takes those measurable results one at a time and finds the measures that are the strongest and most feasible evidence to monitor those results. We write measures in a quantitative way that makes it easier to create matching targets. Step 4 checks the results and measures with a broader community of stakeholders in a fun and organic way to make sure that they are as good as they can be. Step 5 details the implementation for each measure, from its calculation to the data needed to bring it to life. We don't set targets yet, but we start defining the role of targets in monitoring the performance of each measure. And step 6 puts the measures into special graphs that clearly shows signals of shifts or change in performance over time. Now we can get a baseline for each measure when we have these charts and start setting targets and adding them to each measure's XMR chart. Step 7 adds to those signals of change some extra analysis about causes and recommended actions to keep performance on track. In this step, we start interpreting performance targets to decide which measures need attention. Step 8 puts all this information to use to either create new change initiatives or tweak existing change initiatives to find the best leverage to reach the results. And this is the pointy end of targets. We decide on improvement actions and check if those actions moved our baseline closer to the target we set.
So hopefully Peter's explanation there has sort of made it fairly clear that target setting is a part of a good performance measurement process. It's not a separate thing. You don't do it separately. It's the thinking has to be blended with your thinking about the whole measurement process. Now, if you're keen to improve how targets can motivate and drive performance improvement, then if you don't already have PUMP, it might be something that you actually need. So Pete, do you want to give us some ideas for how they can come learn PUMP with you?
In our PUMP Blueprint training programs, you will systematically learn each step of PUMP. You will learn and practice each new technique of PUMP. You'll see how the corresponding templates or conversational guides that have in PUMP or tool makes it practical and collaborative, or rather makes PUMP very practical and collaborative. You'll have really examples to provide for your team of how others have done it. We also go beyond case studies. We give time and coaching to help you apply PUMP steps to measure your own real life goals. When you go back to work after the program, you'll know what to do, how to do it, and where to find support for deeper dives. We provide a free silver membership in our PUMP community for exclusive case studies, how-to tips, and exclusive webcasts just like this. You can learn the PUMP Blueprint live in these ways. One, at one of our live public training workshops in Africa, by hosting your own private in-house workshop exclusive with your colleagues, or contacting me if you'd like more information about how we can help you with better performance measurement and evidence-based leadership. Our next upcoming online 5 half-day PUMP Blueprint workshop will be on the June 20th to 24th this year. And before we wrap up, are there any unanswered questions you still have about targets or PUMP?
So if you do have any questions that we haven't answered today about, like Peter said, about targets or PUMP, then just type them into the questions box and we'll stay live with you until we get them all answered for you. If you do have a question that you are typing in, just raise your hand so we know to wait for you. Otherwise, that'll also let us know if there are no questions and we won't keep you waiting. So if you do have a question and you're about to type it in, just raise your hand so that we know to wait for it. No, Peter, I don't think we're going to get any questions. It seems like we've given everybody enough food for thought for now.
That's great.
Although Jerry says the soccer example brings to mind the individual and organization polarity and the role of targets in making people over-focus on the individual pole to the neglect of the team or organization pole. That's a brilliant polarity, and Jerry, I love that. She says, thanks, Stacey and Peter, great work. Thank you. Okay, well, everybody, I think that seems like it's a wrap. We hope you end up deciding to join our PUMP community soon by coming to one of Peter's PUMP Blueprint workshops. Peter, thank you for sharing your insights today and co-hosting with me.
Yeah, thank you all for creating time to attend this webcast. I really look forward to hosting you at one of our upcoming PUMP Blueprint workshops.
Thanks, everyone. It's been great having you join us today and participating so actively. If you have any further questions, just email me, info@staceybarr.com, or email Peter at piandar@bc.org. Yep, it's there on the screen. But until next time, everybody, happy target setting. Bye.